Hello everyone, welcome to the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, otherwise known as The MADE. My name is Michael, I've been a volunteer here for about 10 years now, and first off, I just want to thank everyone for making it through all of this strange and extreme weather we've been having lately to attend this talk. It means a lot to me because this is my first time actually doing the intro for one of these. If this is your first time here, I know I've spoken to a couple of you guys are new. The MADE is a nonprofit museum that educates and engages our community through the exhibition of digital entertainment artifacts and focusing on playable forms of those artifacts. Our mission is to inspire the next generation of digital creators through playable preservation of our digital artifacts. If you want to get involved, you can donate or volunteer. If you look behind you there are some flyers for our programming classes and other information. So today we have a very exciting topic and an excellent set of speakers. This is the first time I've actually had to do notes for this because I really want to get the totality of their careers on paper here. We have 3 members of the XR Guild, a nonprofit fostering ethical outcomes for XR and the Metaverse. They're here to discuss modern extended reality from its humble beginnings in text-based multiplayer worlds and military simulators to the coming convergence with concepts like generative AI and all-day wearable glasses, combining ideas from some of your favorite pieces of science fiction like Star Trek or Dennou Coil, if there's any anime fans out here. As some of our longtime museum members may know, the MADE has been instrumental in the preservation of Habitat, one of the first online multiplayer worlds with a graphical interface. So this is a topic near and dear to many of our volunteers and staff, and we actually have one of the co-creators here, Randy Farmer. Say hi, Randy. Hello. So it gives me a great pleasure to introduce our speakers, starting with, let's start from the left here, Amy Lemire. Amy is a managing partner at the WXR Fund. It's a venture fund investing in early-stage companies that are transforming business and human interaction using spatial computing, think VR and AR, and AI. The WXR portfolio is comprised of female founders and gender-diverse teams across industries including retail, healthcare, training, remote work, real estate, and education. After spending the first part of her career at Akamai Technologies, she's also an angel investor and advisor for music and metaverse companies, including Stageverse, TribeXR, Infinite Album, and Wristband. She's also a published author working with Charlie Fink on the book Convergence, How the World Will Be Painted with Data. To her right is Ivo Heining. She's an interactive producer for 25 years, including 17 years specializing in the metaverse, XR, and virtual worlds, creating social and live FX. If you're a fan of any Disney properties, you may have seen the work she and her FX team have done on some of those shows. Her book, Promptcraft, a guidebook for generative media in creative work, was published last month, and Shem, I've got purchase orders for both of those books waiting on your desk there.
Awesome.
And her art gallery and design studio, Reality Craft, is right here in Oakland on Peralta Street. For any Oakland locals, it's like 4 blocks northeast of Horn Barbecue. So if you're not doing anything on Saturday, I got your afternoon all set for you. You're welcome. And she's also working on a new book on world building due out this summer. Is it still on track?
Still on track, yeah.
Awesome, great. And finally, we have Avi Barzev, who has been at the forefront of XR and the Metaverse for 30 years, first with the launch of Disney's Aladdin VR ride in the 90s, which I tried to get onto as a kid. Line was too long. It's okay. But also crafting Second Life's 3D worlds, which I have experienced as a teenager, so thank you for that. And he's also one of the co-founders of the Keyhole browser, which you may know better as Google Earth. He also co-invented the Microsoft HoloLens and contributed to projects for Amazon and Apple, and as well, he does private consulting for top XR companies and investors. Most recently, he is the founder, or one of the founders, and the president of the XR Guild. And with that, I will hand it off to you, Avi.
Oh, thank you. Those awesome introductions, and thank you all for coming. So we have about 14 slides, and then we're just going to talk for the rest of it. And if either of you want to jump in on any of the slides, feel free. It's all stuff you know. So we'll make this as interactive as we can. But we're going to get to sort of a discussion, mutual questions. This is to give you some background. Pretty sure Randy doesn't need any of this background, but in case there's one person in the audience who does. The first thing I'm going to show you is this eye-pop and chart here. I've been putting in a little effort to try to collect, and you don't have to see all the detail here, but this is a timeline of all the terms that we've used over the years. Information superhighway, cyberspace, and it's there to explain the metaverse is not new. It's as a concept existed even before it came out in 1992 in Snow Crash. And you can see some of the other books here that have led to this, going all the way back to 1935. This concept had been in development for a long time, and it's just reaching a level now where more and more people are becoming aware of it. But because of this eye chart, and there's so many different terms for things, that's one of the reasons why the word metaverse has stuck as much as it is, because people didn't want to say, I'm using Ask Jeeves or AltaVista. They just said, I'll Google it. They just wanted something simple to explain what we're doing without having to deal with all the nuances that those of us in the field get upset when we lose. So that's kind of the answer. So we're kind of stuck with this term, metaverse, for better or worse. It's the term that is stuck, and whether it survives or not is really a function of how well the people that use it are doing with the things that they build. So far not so great, but it always has a chance to come back. This is another chart of the hype cycles. So you may have seen a couple of years ago the metaverse was at the top of the charts, and now people barely say it, and now people are all talking about AI this year. Hard to get a company funded unless AI is in the business plan. But that'll also probably change. Not that the AI goes away, and not that the metaverse went away. It's the hype. For some reason, no offense, investors seem to be very much of a herd mentality. You have to be, kind of counter-cyclical to really, I think, get away from that and do well.
And the media, to be fair. It's also the media cycles that follow along these things. But eventually it all fades back and it disappears. It's just part of our tools.
Yeah. So this is just showing that the metaverse has kind of gone down again. We predicted this just because, if you get a word that popular and can't quite deliver on the experience, it's going to go down. And it's highly possible that whoever does hit it out of the park next time is going to pick a different word to avoid the baggage and to say that it's all new. Nobody wants to say, we're the ones that finally made that word work. Most people just want to say, look at our stuff, it's new. So that's likely that there'll be a new name for it. And it could go the way of Xerox and Google and be a name of a product that becomes a generic name. I don't know what it is, I could guess, but it doesn't matter. Nobody has a real crystal ball here. But anyway, so now this year we're in the AI part of the hype cycle, and we'll see what comes out next. So when at the peak of the hype, this was a slide that I actually presented originally in about 2 years ago, right after Facebook had rebranded itself as Meta. And so this is poking fun at that a bit as to why did they do that? What is going on? And there was this term we had at Microsoft when I was there called licking the cookie. And the meaning of this term is you get a big plate of cookies and you want them and you don't want anybody else to eat them, so you lick them and you put them back, right? And so it prevents the other people from eating the cookies. And so there's a sense of urgency, at least up to all these layoffs that they've had. There was a sense of hire fast, build up fast, get this XR stuff out the door and so that we can win. It felt a bit desperate and in fact was a bit rushed. So if you've seen the scene from Squid Games, this is another sense of licking the cookie. Lick the cookie fast enough to make sure you don't get shot in the head. That's kind of what it felt like. That was this supreme rush to get everything out there when it wasn't baked, it wasn't ready. And the main criticism that a lot of people offered was, that Facebook, Meta put stuff out there that looked like stuff from 20 years ago. And you're like, if they're putting that much money into it, we expect it to be a lot better, I think is what people were saying. That vision of the metaverse maybe wasn't the one that was sticking and resonating with people. Doesn't mean it's not going to work ultimately, but that may not be the best entry point to get to it. So in a sense, they were copying some things that they'd read in fiction. On that, why did I have another mic? Okay, so
another example of that, right? Google Glass,
yeah.
Right? So didn't necessarily work, but something like that will be likely a thing at some time in the future.
Exactly. And the glass is still alive. It's there for businesses, and other competing smart glasses are coming out. It's just that there's a lot of lessons that you learn from something like that, which biggest lesson to take away from glass, I think, is At least the way I would put it, is don't superpower some of your people and underpower others. The people who wear the glasses had the power to take pictures quietly without us noticing. You can do it on your phone, but you notice it, right? People see you're taking a picture. So nobody likes being photographed secretly. And then also you could look at things secretly. And so that created a social power imbalance that they didn't account for, but they could have. They could have made it a very privacy-centric device, and they might have overcome some of that initially.
And today, if you look at smart glasses, where they've been adopted is in industrial uses, first responders, right? These are not Google Glass; these are industrial, like hard case uses.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll circle back to that in a minute. The one of the things I just want to put on this slide is there's a lot of future prognostication in science fiction. It's all about what if in the future. And they get things right occasionally, but we should not be building things from science fiction is, I guess, the point of the story. Because if you try to build it, you're also going to get the bad things, and some bad things that the authors didn't anticipate about their theoretical inventions. And so it always kind of dismayed me when people said we're building Snow Crash. We're like, no, I don't want to live in the world of Snow Crash. Thank you. That's not what we want.
Building the Oasis.
Building the Oasis, yeah. There's this great joke about do not build the Torment Nexus, right? Because it was meant to be a cautionary tale of what not to do, and people took it as a recipe instead. It turns out from this entire list of authors that I put here, all good books, the one that actually nailed the future the best was Octavia Butler. She didn't predict the technology as much as the society that we're living in, the world that we're living in of constant emergencies and a sense of unease, that nothing's quite right and we can't fix it. And she really nailed that better than any of the other authors, although various of them have interesting technologies that they've shared over the years. The one that's actually probably the most successful in tech is Arthur C. Clarke, right? He predicted satellites and a whole bunch of other things that came to fruition. We haven't quite built the space elevator yet, but I think eventually we will. So he was pretty good about that. So we mentioned Dennou Coil. I highly recommend watching this. It's a 25-episode series. Now it is available in the U.S. Used to be the only way to get it was to pirate it. Now you can actually buy it. And it's a story of, I think, a really well-told story of what happens when kids as young as 5 or 6 wear AR glasses. And the glasses that you can see on their faces are really thin. They're almost not noticeable. Right? They look like safety glasses or even lighter than that. But the important thing is these kids never take them off, even when they think crazy things are happening in the world and they're dealing with ghosts and phantoms and all sorts of things they're using to interpret technology. They never just go, oh, it's not real. It just becomes part of their world and it's natural to them. And really, it's just a great overall story to help explain it. Every AR team I've worked on, I've made the team watch this series because it teaches a lot. There's another thing that everybody in the field has seen at some point, which is Star Trek. And this is a scene from an episode called Schisms of Star Trek The Next Generation. Hopefully you've seen it. But it's a great scene where they need to reconstruct memories using the holodeck and speaking to the computer. Why is that relevant now? We're looking at this generative AI stuff as part of what we're talking about here. And it's all about typing to the computer. That's just a stone's throw away from being able to say, computer, make me a table. Question,
Earl Grey hot.
or Earl Grey hot, if we had a replicator, we could actually make it for real. But in the holodeck, the matter was meant to not leave. You couldn't really eat the matter there, but you could make anything you want. And what was amazing about this particular one, I'll play the scene again, is the computer is trying to help Geordi and Riker reconstruct their memories. And all he said is, "Oh, make it a metal table." And all of a sudden, you get the metal table that you wanted. How would it possibly know which metal table you want? It worked here. We don't have a great explanation yet for how the computer's going to know. One of the possibilities is context. The more the computer knows about you, the more it can guess what you mean when you say car or table.
Black shirt.
Exactly. And so that's good and bad. Context is good because computers can do stuff for us, and it's bad if the data is going to a company that's using it against us, which we'll get to later. But anyway, that was a very inspiring scene, and you see 20, 30 years later, people are now finally building tools that are like what we saw in fiction, in the holodeck. Of course, here's what happens if the computer doesn't get it right. You get Clippy again, saying, can I help you with your medical procedure? Not understanding the context and not really getting what they're trying to do. It turns out, I know some of the people who created Clippy as a research project. It was way smarter when it was a research product. And as soon as they tried to cram it into Office, they had to strip it way down, and it became annoying and dumb. And so the big news of generative AI is it's gotten much better. but it's still not perfect. There's a lot of issues with the technology that are important to understand, and one of those is really understanding what you mean. So the upper left picture is actually art that Evo's created using generative AI. I took it from her site. The one on the right, I think, is NVIDIA, showing that we can do this for 3D as well. We can say, give me an elephant, and it'll know what an elephant is. And so we're that close to being able to do the holodeck. Maybe not as a giant room, but in a VR headset, we can get there almost by telling the computer what we want. Of course, it doesn't always get it right. So in the bottom row, half of those pictures are me trying to get the computer to interpret a bicycle for the mind. Steve Jobs' famous phrase that computers are a bicycle for the mind. So I said, show me a picture of a bicycle for the mind. And it put a brain on a bicycle, and it tried all sorts of crazy things. After changing the prompts, the one with the green border is actually artistically drawn by a human. That's the one that actually got it right. So we're not quite there yet. And the thing with the bicycle on the left was one of the takeaways from this bicycle on the mind was that people realized that a human on a bicycle is actually the most efficient means of transportation. And I said, really? Is that Canada geese fly thousands of miles every year on very little food? Aren't they more? No, it turns out a human on a bike is more efficient. But I said, what could be more efficient than that? A Canada goose on a bike, right? That's got to be more efficient. So we haven't seen that quite yet. All right. So getting back to the origins of this space, for those of you who aren't that familiar with it, a lot of this technology that we're dealing with comes from military simulation and games. Games have really pushed things along for the whole time. And that's good and bad. It's good because a lot of the DNA that goes into the metaverse is the same DNA in terms of efficiency and organization. But the downside is these tended to be very male-dominated activities. They weren't necessarily inclusive of everybody. Military is about killing people often, not just defending yourself. And so a lot of that legacy of the origins of the space also need some remediation as we go forward to make sure that it's a safe place for everybody. That just because you're in a player versus player kill world 1 minute doesn't mean you can harass random people in a virtual world the next. They're real people and they have real feelings, and those are things that we've had to learn over the years, how to treat people with more empathy. And it doesn't necessarily come from the background of the tech. We have to add it. And that, plus the thing I mentioned about the ad-driven world, which I'll just briefly say, the companies who cropped up in the early 2000s with this business model, right after the dot-com bust around 2000, the survivors were largely companies that had ad-driven businesses. And nobody really thought that was a bad thing back then. It's like, okay, it's free. Everybody can use it for free. You can't compete with that, right? But we're learning what the price of free really is at this point, right? In terms of Instagram's effect on people's mental health, Facebook. And I think the thing that still isn't discussed enough yet is the fact that it's not free. We actually are paying for it. In the products that you buy, every advertised product that you buy is marked up 15 to 30%. So it could be that much cheaper if there weren't the advertising. And that advertising money then goes to the agencies and the marketing budgets and then goes to Facebook and Google. That's where their money is coming from. It's our pocket. So wouldn't you rather pay a small fee a month, like $10 a month? Would be way less than you're losing right now in terms of ads budgets for products. So I think we have to rethink this equation a bit and understand the costs of the business models that we've allowed to go on so long. And then if you're interested in that, I have a whole other talk about eye tracking and invasions of privacy and how this stuff can oppress us ultimately. And maybe we'll get to that today, but we're here just to talk about the overview. So we shall see. So all these things bring us to the XR Guild, and why are we here today, and why did we even put this guild together? Well, given the military origins and wargaming kind of aspects of virtual worlds, given the exploitation that happens from business models that are not necessarily helping everybody, we thought we needed to step in, and one more reason is this stuff isn't taught. It's not taught in school even yet, not in this field anyway. If you go become a doctor, they teach you about ethics. If you become a lawyer, they teach you about ethics, right? That's amazing.
Even in MBAs.
MBAs, ethics.
Now has ethics.
Computer science wasn't part of my curriculum, and I'm not even sure they're teaching it in all the schools. You have to be more on the liberal arts side to get anything closer to that in philosophy and ethics. So it's a big deficit right now. And people, we strongly believe that people want to do the right thing. People want to build products that everybody loves. They don't want people hurt by what they do, but it happens, and it happens because I think there's a lack of information. People don't understand how to build products in a way that is more ethical and more healthy for people. So why do we need the guild? Well, ethics turns out to be something, if you watch the show The Good Place, they did a brilliant job of weaving ethics into the show. You think you're getting a chalkboard lesson from Chidi about ethics, but that's just like 2 minutes of the show, and you almost don't pay attention to which philosopher said what. No, nobody cares. What matters is the rest of the show actually plays out the ethical dilemma that Chidi highlights up front. So if you watch the show for the entertainment value, you're getting the lesson, right? You're learning about ethics without having to know the history of it. So I think it's pretty brilliant they were able to do that. Ethics crops up everywhere, and design, in terms of all these design philosophies of user-centered design, privacy by design, safety design. All these things are meant to produce the same results of something, really ethical. In the meantime, we also have to work really hard to make sure that we are being diverse and inclusive of everybody. That's one of the things that we didn't start well with. When Origins were all about military and war games, there was only a certain demographic that likes these things, and that's fine. This great escape, I play all these games too, but it left out a lot of people. And so we have to figure out how to be inclusive of everybody, because just like with Google Glass, if we only enable a few people and don't enable everybody, you get a huge social problem. That's not going to work, and unintended consequences as well. So why did we do this? So who benefits from the work we're doing? We're really trying to get ethical decision-making information into the hands of all the people who are working in the space. So any maker who's making any kind of VR, XR, AR, Metaverse, we want to give them more information, better information, so they can make better choices in the products that they build. We want to empower them, basically, and that's the reason we created it as a membership organization, was to invite them to join. All they have to do is accept a set of ethical principles that we publish, and once they're in, they can change the principles as well. They can come back and say that one doesn't apply anymore, and we'll vote on those. And we try not to go around shaming companies or blaming companies, but we want to give everybody an opportunity to do better and encouragement to do better in the space. So what are the principles that we ask people to agree to? This is, I think, the last slide. So there are 12 of them, and if we have time, we can go through them, but I don't know if the most important thing is to go literally read through all 12. They're up on our website. If you go to xrguild.org, if you do that/principles, you'll see all the principles laid out. The front page has links to this as well. And we're also starting a library, so it's not really announced yet, but if you go to library.xrguild.org, you start to see some of the resources that we're collecting. And one of our goals is to actually be able to make very accessible and entertaining content that will help explain these things. So it isn't about reading a list of principles, it's going to be about watching a short clip of people enacting the principles and demonstrating them in the way that The Good Place did, without having a huge budget, and in ways that anybody could hopefully learn from. And that's our mission. We're trying to get funded for that. We're applying for grants, and but right now we're also just trying to grow the membership. So anybody who feels like this is important to you as well is encouraged to come join. There's currently no dues, so it's free. You just have to agree to the principles and be in the space. So that is the slide deck. And do we want to start at the back and talk about these things, or do you want to pick a specific topic and jump into one of those? You get to pick, since I talked already.
Maybe we pick a principle and talk about one of those.
Okay. Can you see it?
I can. I'm trying to think which is the one that we've had the most dialogue about, like which is the one that's had the most discussion in the group.
I think so. That's a good thing to actually mention. One of the things that we do is we have meetups. We had a meetup here a couple of months ago, and in those meetups we invite people to come and talk about the dilemmas, the hard issues. And so the one that while we were here, we talked about generative AI and the ethical issues around that. Yeah. And that that isn't specifically called out, but it is part of this. I think what happens the most, the one that we wind up getting sort of pegged to the most, is this duty to help mitigate serious problems. Yeah. And it's trying to convince people that it's everybody's job. I mean, a lot of big companies have professional ethicists on staff that can write white papers and help us understand these issues. But it's actually every developer's job, not just programmers, but PMs and designers, managers. just to give you a good example, the more recent meetup we had in Palo Alto, we talked about a lot of things, generative AI as well, but one of the people was an expert on child safety. And so she works on a lot of online child safety stuff. And this is an issue with these headsets, right? They say 13 and up, so they're not yet good for kids that are younger. There's some that are designed so that they could fit anybody, but these headsets are designed for larger heads. They don't handle the interpupillary distances of kids very well. Also, some adults also don't wear them well. And in any event, what one of these large companies did was they put out their headset and they kind of marketed it to kids, kind of like the way cigarettes were marketed to kids. And they put warnings on the box, but they were so small compared to any toy you would buy. It has a choking hazard. It was like 8-point font on the box saying 13 and up. And it was a little more information once you ran the app and tried to install it. But you could imagine a PM in the company, a product manager, saying, you know what we should do is we should make that bigger. And you know what else we should do is we should make sure that kids have their own special accounts, like you do if you use family sharing on the iPhone. You can set the rules for your kids, and you can say, okay, you could use VR, but only for 15 minutes, because I'm not sure it's going to be safe or not, right? And so we don't know if
TikTok putting those rules in now versus when they were really
a little late, right? These companies are just now starting to search for child porn. It's like, okay, 18 years later, like now we can find some of it, but what we really want is for that PM to be empowered inside the big company to say, let's really do it. Let's put the bigger warning on the box. Let's make sure parents understand they have to make an account first, then a kid account. And let's even use this technology to make sure we do it right. For example, there's big companies that say, well, we don't know when kids are using it. How could we possibly know when a child is using the headset? Well, there's just a study, a friend of mine just helped with a study at Berkeley where they're able to identify you from your movements in VR within literally a minute. If they've seen you before, based on the way you move uniquely, they can re-identify you. Well, if the parents set up an account, I'm pretty sure using that same technology, the system could tell that it was the kid using the account, not just a small adult, but it's not the same adult that set it up. So they could solve this if they wanted to. It's just a little bit extra cost, a little bit extra work. And we're there to say, do it. We're there to say it's important. Please put the effort in.
And I want to spotlight a few of these other, I don't think they can see them now, but we'll, I'm just going to say them again. So specifically, there's a handful that I think each of us focuses on differently and well. I'm a former teacher as well as a creator, so I focus on teaching what we know to increase dialogue, understanding, and making sure that we are having conversations about those tricky issues about, for example, generative AI and attribution, or how we work with these tools effectively together while staying abreast of what is a rapidly changing landscape. I don't know if we're going to get it back or not. Yeah. Specifically, there was two here that I wanted to spotlight. The metaverse and XR hardware and software should benefit end users and their communities. We often have this huge gap between what the industry is creating and what people are actually asking for. And that is a very unlevel playing field. So if we're trying to create a more level playing field in terms of accessibility and, for example, educational access, it means talking to teachers as well as students and getting a sense of, okay, how can this enrich what you're doing in the classroom? How can this enrich what's happening in the hospital? How can this enrich what's happening at home, instead of thinking about the sort of big mall retail experiences that you might have heard about with the metaverse right now? So there is that sort of gap between the economic conversation, and obviously all these things are highly risky, and so much of what we're doing is addressing risk, not only in cybersecurity and data leaks, in the breakdown of agreements that happens between industry holders or standards bodies even, but it's also thinking about where are the gaps between the end user and the industry and what those decisions are going to lead to down the road, right? So the gap between 7 and 13 right now, where kids don't really have a great interface except for their mobile phones, means that they're in AR, they're using Niantic, they're not necessarily in VR as much, right? So that's a case where we're not quite meeting yet. We're getting there, but is AR a really good gateway to the metaverse and WebXR and the fully immersive web experience? Not yet, right? We don't have a fully connected web that a 12-year-old who's at a school library can go and traverse right now. We have the beginnings of those agreements. We have portals between WebXR worlds so they could walk from a museum to a gallery to a library. That's the start of infrastructure. But it's a long way to get to, okay, this is actually useful in the classroom today.
Yeah, those are great points. Some of these, each of these, which unfortunately we'll ask.
Is there some way we can...
We'll get you back.
But
You
I
might
have
have to replug it
if I
back in
stop
on
the
the
presentation, I
HDMI
can then
maybe.
restart it, but I don't want to lose the recording. So let me just stop that and then.
We'll get you back.
Try it.
While he's bringing it back up, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Can you give a concrete example of that disconnect between the product that's being offered and what the community is saying they've been asking for?
Ooh, well, I go to a lot of industry events where the metaverse products they're putting out look worse than Second Life did 15 years ago.
Sure.
So that's, for example, one way in which the large-scale consulting companies are delivering a metaverse that people maybe aren't looking for, versus delivering an interactive experience where people can collaborate effectively, take their work out, and then do something with it, which is the actual need in work, for example, spaces to collaborate effectively where everyone can get on the same page, still take their work out and do something with it later. That part is currently missing from almost every metaverse product out there.
Yeah, and we see that a lot in pitches, right? So they're bringing a new cool technology, but not necessarily solving a problem. And so I really love the type of companies that we invest in are, for example, a teacher that wanted a better way to teach math and ultimately found out that VR can do it versus, oh, VR is cool, maybe we can use it to teach math. You see the difference, right? So same with Embodied Labs is another one. So it was a woman who was trying to figure out how to better care for her mother who had Alzheimer's, and starting from the problem, how do I better care for my mother, versus starting from VR is cool, maybe I can use it to do this thing. So,
And I think we saw that with a lot of the announcements of the metaverse, where everybody jumping on and showing what their vision for the future. There are people who love Horizon that wanted to play it because they've been playing sort of cartoony avatars for a long time, and they're totally fine with it. But I think the mainstream audience looked at that and said, "That's I got video games look better than that. Like, why does that look so bad?" Right?
Or I couldn't own what I created and couldn't therefore build anything of value in someone else's walled garden. And so the walled garden approach to metaverse experiences just didn't work for a large number of creators.
Yeah. And then they showed things like the meeting room of the future, right? Meeting room of the future looks just like the meeting room today. Like, that's not the future. Like, let's figure out how to get rid of meetings. Yeah. It's like literally a gray conference room. Right? Like, come on, can you use some imagination and figure out what should we be doing instead of the meetings that we left behind for COVID? Now we're on Zoom. We don't want to just go back and virtually recreate the meetings that we left. That was no fun. So really put your heads to thinking what is the future of communication, the future of being embodied and having a sense of presence together. But it's not just doing all the same stuff we used to do, because that's not fulfilling.
it's like putting the yellow pages on the internet, but it looking just like the yellow pages, right? Versus having Google Maps.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's so many options for. Are any of you designers? I don't know how much you're thinking about interaction design, but going back to like 2006-07 in the early Second Life days, we knew that, for example, people have better meetings outdoors versus inside a building. So thinking about interaction design differently is what this space can offer. Lots of great research room, lots of great research labs that you can even partner with to take that work to the next level and say, okay, how do we improve collaboration? How do we improve global art making? How do we improve a civic engagement process, right? All of these things are vastly untapped spaces where all of you could potentially fill in.
The other thing about meetings that's interesting is there's a lot of people who are very much enamored of this idea, and I get into fights with some of them during the peak metaverse hype, and they were saying, well, the metaverse has to be the union of everything. So all the virtual worlds, all the AR worlds, all get unified in the metaverse. And I'm sitting there going, I don't like that, because here I am. I want to have my meeting at the top of the Eiffel Tower. That's my outdoor location that I want to do it. I don't want to have it at the real Eiffel Tower, because I don't want random, even virtually, I don't want random virtual tourists popping into my meeting. That's like Zoom bombing. Like, I don't want that. I want my own copy of the Eiffel Tower that has me and the people I'm meeting with, and maybe some non-player characters in the background just to make it look busy, but they're not real people and they're not really listening. And I know it's a private conversation. So I don't want everything unified into some common giant address space like IP addresses. That would be overkill. A lot of stuff is private. A lot of stuff is personal. So I've talked about that a lot in the last 2 or 3 years, trying to explain the nuances of there are plenty of things we want to connect together, but don't start with this idea of a universe filled with galaxies, filled with planets, filled with, and we're just flying around in spaceships like the Oasis, like fiction has done it. I think that's great for games, but I don't think that's where we're going to be spending our day. It's much more like, like what we're starting to talk about with AI now, which is there's going to be, computers are there to help us. They're there to provide tools for us and shortcuts for us to make our lives easier and better. And so why are we recreating all the bad stuff? Let's figure out how to actually use that for good. And of course, that also means making sure the data stays private, because it can't be used for advertising and exploitation if we're going to be giving away really such an intimate data. That's a very critical thing to fix. And that shows up in a lot of places in these principles. I think the middle section, by the way, is, I worked with on this with Tony Parisi. He had his own 7 laws of it, and I condensed them into about 3 in the middle of these principles. But they're basically trying to say no one company can dominate. It just can't work. We don't want to create a monopoly situation where somebody gets to dictate all the rules. And so Ivo and I, the people who've been working on some of this standard setting, I tend to not actually help write standards much, because it's a like committee, really boring thing when you sit in a room and debate whether it should be an integer or a float. I don't have patience for that. But I really want the results, so I try to help in a lot of ways, and same with Eva, which tries to help organize people to talk to each other so that we can get the standards we need. I just don't want to be the one to write the standard.
And if you want to be more experimental, I also help lead a group called Open Metaverse Interoperability. We're about to have our 100th week of weekly meetings. And that group works on extensions for GLTF, or ways in which we can make our creative work more portable across all of these open metaverse, whether it's a WebXR space or inside a game. So that tooling, and also the sort of experimentation that goes along with it, is happening mostly through like Discord groups and GitHub and in open source communities. It's not held inside a company. It's definitely because of open source developers.
Yeah, agreed. Maybe we should ask for questions.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Is there time? So just raise your hand. We'll call on you.
I'm here because my wife saw this meetup and saw the acronym MUDS and said, you should go to this thing. It mentioned MUDS. And so I said, oh, well, it looks cool, beyond that. But admittedly, that is a lot of, I think about them a lot, and I've researched their histories, and I run a big community on a Linux server, and we kind of overlap a lot with MUD development. We're developing a new mush engine, things like that. So a lot of these problems and principles are things that I've been thinking about in designing a pedagogically oriented, beginner-friendly, radically inclusive, but text-based virtual world environment. So I'm super interested to hear, were there experiences from that era that have informed kind of where you've ended up today thinking about these principles? And I've read a lot of literature about it, but I'm just curious from a personal perspective if there's any anecdotes or incidents or things that kind of stuck with you from there.
So yeah, I mean, I've played these forever, right? So I've same sort of history. And I could say, it was really, really vivid in my memory. Back in 1992, I was like the people today who go metaverse. Like, I really didn't think the internet was going to take off unless it was 3D. Like, that was a stupid idea, but that's what I thought in 1992. That we're just waiting for 3D to come down in price so that we can make this giant virtual world like people talk about now. And I've had 30 years to learn why that's wrong. So one of the things is I had a great opportunity to work on Second Life. And I wrote the system that creates all the primitives in the world and some avatar stuff. I should be the prime user. Like, I'm the target demographic, right, for Second Life. I should want to use it. I like architecture. I wrote some of the code, right? and I used it and I got griefed within the first couple of minutes, and it was really annoying. Right in the launch world, you're coming in and you're supposed to be welcomed in your first couple of minutes experience, and I got griefed immediately. I'm like, if we can't solve this is not going anywhere. And those problems of social behavior have been there since the beginning. They've always existed, and I wish we could say we've solved them. Ralph Koster is a friend of mine. He was a designer right on Star Wars Galaxies and Ultima Online, and he tells the exact same stories of how do you deal with human behavior. And we're seeing it now with these chat GPTs, where there's a bunch of people who are going and trying to figure out how to subvert the AI to make it do horrible things. I'm like, thank God it's not hooked up to anything, because it's not that the AI is going to come and kill us, it's that some human who's bored is going to try to teach the AI how to kill us just for fun.
Right.
And we're seeing it over and over again. And some of the AI is being used to moderate and to try to find the bad actors. But that's probably not a great idea either, because some of these things are so subtle. Well, they'll catch the most overt things, but then they'll miss what might be cultural differences between people or other behaviors, and it's going to wind up hurting the most already disenfranchised people again, because the AI is trained improperly to mediate, and humans are probably better at that.
Yeah, I'd say after 30 years of games, there's always dragons, griefers, and trolls, and it's somewhere between 1% to 5% of any community or any group is going to be a dragon, a griefer, or a troll, and you just gotta engineer for that. You have to plan for it and then include them in the way that makes sense. Otherwise, you're constantly at battle.
Yeah, and the one part of the solution may be increasing the level of empathy, right? Because I think a lot of people, if they're not a sociopath in real life, may act sociopathic in a virtual world, and increasing the same thing you would do if somebody took hostages. You try to make everybody seem like humans. Like, you want to make sure that the hostage taker doesn't kill everybody by finding whatever level of empathy they have and using that to get them to act humanely. I think we need to do better, and I think the cartoonish nature of a lot of these things doesn't help. That they look like NPCs. We're not always sure if there's a human or not in these things, and so I think the more we finally cross the uncanny mountain and have people look like people, I think it's going to help, but it's not enough by itself. It's going to take monitoring. It's going to take teaching people. It's going to be, there's people who are persistently bad actors, and we're going to have to find them and isolate them, because they won't get better.
Well, and some worlds are just not going to care. Like, if you're gone into VR chat, people just don't care to moderate it, and some worlds are just going to be the Wild West of say whatever you want and grief anybody you want.
Yeah.
And not on the gaming side, but just I want to give a shout out to one of the companies that we invest in, because it's called Empathic.
It's a great name for a company.
Without an E, so it's Empathic. And they are a Grammarly for empathy. And so it's right now it's a chat tool, so it is a text and not, but you could see that it could go to audio, but it gives guidance to particularly they're focusing on managers right now on how to word things in a different tone. And it doesn't require you to do so, but it is guiding you in that direction. And I'm really excited about what they might be able to do in the future, not only for text, but how will that ultimately impact humanity and how people act outside of computers.
Awesome idea.
More questions?
Yeah.
Going back to teaching math, for instance, what do you think the advantages are of teaching through something like an AR system or a VR system as compared to, for kids that have to learn that system just to learn in the first place, as compared to using a system like Minecraft or Roblox that you can easily mold to teach the kids, but doesn't need to be learned for most of them?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, kids learn really fast. And so they launched, I think, a little less than 18 months ago, and over 100,000 students have used the platform. The hope is it becomes a standard, right? Another interesting point. So they also just launched on Oculus Quest, and that's a consumer-based application that you use at home. And they're finding a lot more challenges with it's two different ways of teaching, right? Teaching in a classroom with a teacher under a structured program with a set of students versus teaching, a one-on-one thing at home where you're just kind of doing something on your own. And for what they have built, they have been more successful in the classroom versus as a consumer, because again, from a design perspective, really different.
And kids learn differently. Some students learn best in a kinesthetic environment, so shooting baskets in VR will work for them like nothing else. And so it's really dependent on the student.
There was a company that I was advised for during class. It was for a brief period, but they had this really cool product. It's a Korean company, and I won't remember the name right now, but they used they basically put an extra camera on an iPad or a tablet in general and put a book in front of it. So there's a physical book. The camera sees the book. It sees little paper cutouts, and it sees the kid's fingers. And so the combination is really interesting of having a physical, tangible book that you have to flip pages on and having cutouts, but then having an AR view that you could see on the screen and project things that were dynamic and interesting. That combination was great because it was tactile. The kids loved that, but it also let their imaginations run wild. And I don't know if that would be possible to marry that with an existing thing like World of Warcraft, where it requires its own kind of infrastructure to make work.
Do it in Roblox for sure, and I've done it in Roblox very successly. It works extremely well.
I think you saw me grinning when you were talking about agencies earlier. I run an agency that uses Minecraft and Roblox and Fortnite and UGC as platforms for marketing. And yeah, it's certainly possible to put that type of thing.
Yeah, at my Roblox theme parks, I bring both students and sometimes like groups in. And during the pandemic, I was teaching other students how to build theme parks for their science fair experiments, right? So that sort of play of intergenerational exploration using Roblox is basically the empty canvas to create in.
Yeah, and not to say that Roblox or Minecraft couldn't do something from an education perspective, but at least I would imagine that would want to be created by a teacher.
It's kind of a different target, because it seems like a VR type of thing, has a large barrier of entry to just an average person that wants to buy one and use it at home. Whereas you could easily get kids interested in the educational process at home with no extra work by making it a video game.
Or WebXR, and just making it available on the web so that it's not VR dependent, but it's still accessible.
Yeah, the hardware, will be an issue for a while, but I'd say in general, even wearable AR is going to be better for kids than VR. So if you use a system like Tilt 5, I'm an advisor to Tilt 5, but just to disclose that, but it doesn't have the same optics issues that you have with the VR headset. So pretty much anybody can wear it. It might be a little loose on a young kid, but it's not going to cause the same visual issues, and it's actually automatically in focus. If you use it at a normal distance sitting from a table, it's just at the sweet spot of where the optics should be. So I would feel comfortable letting my kids wear that for a while versus a VR headset.
Just for those people that don't know what Tilt 5 is, do you want to
So
explain?
Tilt 5 is, the CEO is one named Jerry Ellsworth, who's really kind of genius, and figured out, almost at the same time I was working on HoloLens, I tried putting Pico projectors on your head just to see what it would be like, and she figured out if you do that and you put a retroreflective surface, it's retroreflectors, they're bicycle reflectors or car tail light things. They shine all the light back at you, so the projectors are shining the light onto the table, and it's a mat that you put on the table, and then bouncing it back into your eyes. And so it's a much lighter, simpler headset than most other headsets, and it's selling for like $350 or less. You have to supply your own computer right now, but in the future it'll work off of an iPhone or Android phone or anything you have. So basically you'll be able to walk around with these glasses, but you do need the table. So the compromise they made is it's for gaming, it's for tabletop gaming, it's for things you would do sitting multiple people around a table. It's not meant to work on the street. And that's okay, but it will be perfect for classrooms because you could sit the kids around the table and they could wear this device. And it hasn't, as far as I know, that we haven't gone through the effort of trying to get it cleared officially for kids, but the technology is appropriate as opposed to the VR stuff. And one of the issues for kids as well is, if you shut out the real world, you're dealing with whether the kids have a grasp of reality or not. And if children are still saying close the closet door at night because there's monsters, they're probably too young to be in most VR experiences. They're just too mature and they're too compelling. We form real memories when we're in these things as if it's reality, even though it's not. And so you really, while you might let your kids play a zombie shooter on their PlayStation or Xbox because it's on a TV set, I wouldn't let my kids do the exact same experience in VR because it's just that much more real. I'd wait till a much older age. And even for adults, this comes up. There's two people, I did this list of 100 original voices, and I met some really interesting people doing it. Two of them, one is named Kai Fraser, the other one's Clorama Devalis, and they had both had a similar experience separately of building VR experiences that were really intense. So one of them had worked at the Holocaust Museum and built, the sort of Holocaust simulator that might teach you what it would be like to be in a concentration camp. Turns out it's a really bad idea because you actually create trauma. You're creating PTSD in people who didn't have it to begin with. Now, it can be used to treat PTSD, but only very carefully, right? But if you immerse people in a horrible situation, in the case of the other person, they had tried to do diversity training, racial sensitivity training, by putting people in tense situations. And it turns out that's also a really bad idea because someone might not have been a racist before, but now they're afraid to talk to somebody who's a person of color because of their bad interaction in VR with no real people. They got kind of stigmatized, and it created more barriers and not less. So where the stuff is best is not necessarily trying to overpower us with emotion, but trying to give us a third person perspective on hard situations, or let us learn from watching other people interact, or really briefly try hard situations when we're very well prepared and we can practice those things. But it's really hard to get right, and the psychological aspect of how to use VR is still one of the hardest things to nail.
Follow-up question, I think you all have interesting insights on this. How do you convince school districts or schools to spend the money to get this type of technology into a classroom, especially when the ones that will be more likely to buy it because they can afford it are going to be predominantly white, rich neighborhoods?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've thought about before we invested in Prisms, and what we learned from Anarupo Ganguly, which, by the way, she's done quite a few interviews out there, and I recommend all of them. They're great. But first she was a math teacher, and then she was an administrator. So she really understands how schools use money, and she's actually been targeting schools that aren't rich white schools, and a lot of those schools actually have money to for tech, particularly after pandemic money is related to it. So the least barrier to entry has been getting schools to get the hardware. It's more about how do you teach teachers how to manage it and use it.
There is sometimes a barrier when it comes to cities and school systems on things like bandwidth and what is allowed to happen both for after school clubs and in computer classrooms, for example. And so there is some work of best practices and advocacy that still needs to happen in terms of educating city officials as far as what might be an appropriate use of the technology in classrooms today.
Yeah. But I think there's a openness in education that there maybe wasn't prior to the pandemic to new technologies, and also just with tablets, right? That wasn't rolled out that long ago.
They've already got AR in the classroom, and they're using AR labs, for example, or they're controlling rovers remotely.
Yeah.
Good question, though.
Yeah.
I thought the same thing before as I was doing my diligence on the company. Yeah.
I don't have a good answer, but I went through this myself when I was in school, and that computers were just, personal computers were just becoming available. And the only reason I had one is because one of my math teachers took us up with Commodore to be able to go buy one, and it was all outside of school. She was really trying to help us. And when I was taking math in school and taking computer science, even the teachers hadn't been trained yet. I literally had to teach the programming class in school as a kid, because the teacher had learned math but hadn't learned programming. And so I think we just have to get to that point where the stuff is ubiquitous enough and everybody has it and they know it, and then it flows a little more naturally past the early adopters.
But a really good point why we need principles, because it is emerging technology, it is new technology, and although we've gone through technology phases before and we try to learn from them, we need to remind ourselves as we're building these new spaces.
Yeah, I always like to say let's not make the same mistakes we've always made, because we've made them. We've hopefully learned from them. Not everybody learned from them, but let's try. Let's make all new mistakes, all bigger, better ones, and not the old ones again. That we should know better. So that's a lot of this is just rolling up knowledge that we have and we've learned, and we want to make sure everybody has a benefit of that knowledge, so that they're enabled to go try brand new things and hopefully succeed, but sometimes fail at those as well. One more question, maybe?
I'm thinking that the new AI from the virtual world, but in virtual world, the real glass, the lighter and smaller.
Yeah.
Everyone was always using it in the future, and it has the potential to make AI because we can get a lot of data from virtual world, but it has a problem. For example, the privacy.
Yep.
And in US, what kind of problem will the AI have to reply with information private, but it has potential to make AI. So, but we have to protect the privacy. So.
I can try to address that. So the general question is on AI and AR glasses in the future, and there's a huge overlap between all the stuff happening under AI and all the investment happening. And tell me if I don't get your question right, but with AR glasses, and one of those examples is right now, big companies are putting even fancier glasses on people's faces that have sensors, cameras looking out, cameras looking in, they're recording everything. So there's a lot of research projects that are going on right now that are trying to collect all this data about how do people interact in the real world. Ultimately, that data could be used in two major ways. One is it could provide better algorithms, lower power algorithms, and make the glasses better. Two, it could be exploitive. It could be, once we learn who you like, where you go, what you do, all the stuff that they can't get today from just, from your chat with your friends, they can't extract all this information yet. But once they can see what you're seeing by using eye tracking and cameras in the world, a company that's not having your best interest at heart can use a lot of that data for exploitation. And so we need a big change in privacy before that happens, right? We're just on the cusp. Not everybody has a pair of glasses with cameras in them yet. But when we get there, we want to make sure the rules are in place to protect everybody. Because if those companies are just selling ads like they do today and giving out products at discounts and free this and free that, all that money is going into effectively trying to make the ads better, which means that we're going to be more exploited than we even are today. And given eye tracking, we can learn essentially, not like literally what you're thinking about, but what you're paying attention to and how you feel about the things that you see. And that's exactly the missing piece that the advertisers need to know how to market to you specifically and how to be exploitive. So I think we need to decide collectively, let's not enable that. Let's just not go there, because we've already seen what happens with half bad technology. That's going to be full bad. And the only thing could be worse than that is brain scanning technology that's trying to extract your memories. This is almost to that point, because like I said, we could tell who you're attracted to, we can tell you politics, we could tell how you react to anything you see. So did you pay attention to those other commercials or not? Or how do you feel about people? And now as soon as you can start making new kinds of ads that are not the traditional, billboard ads, but ads that leverage our knowledge about the fact that we trust our friends more, we trust people that look like ourselves more. Psychologically, those things have been shown to be true. Now we're going to introduce non-player characters that look like your friends and look like you. And they're going to be sitting and having a conversation about, boy, isn't that soft drink the best thing ever? And it's all there to manipulate you. And they'll know when it works, they know when it doesn't work, and they'll be able to make it better and better and better until you're basically a rat in a maze doing exactly what you've been conditioned to do. That's where we lose our autonomy, because the companies will be able to keep us addicted in the same way that your social network sends you, when you try to log out, sends you an email saying, look what happened when you were away, come on back. It's going to be worse than that. And so we have to regulate it.
Those risks have social repercussions and how communities decide to form or fall apart. And so if you travel around the world Like if you are a well-known person, you might choose not to go to a country where there is facial recognition, where you can be tracked everywhere. And I know celebrities who won't travel to specific countries because they don't like the data policies, for example, right? We don't have the same data policies that Europe does, right? And so there are certainly some folks here who are trying to move toward a more European way of working with our data so that we could, for example, walk to the metaverse Eiffel Tower and then not necessarily have everyone know that we were there in that moment. Right now, we don't have those agreements in place. I don't know that we're going to get there right away, but that's part of why we are continuing the dialogue in public and not just behind closed doors.
Into that?
Yeah, and advocate for people maybe to not include those technologies if they're working on an innovation project, because that isn't necessarily the best choice.
Yeah, what kills me is that some of these technologies are really useful. Like eye tracking is incredibly useful for making an avatar of you, or for foveated rendering, or even the personal insights if it was working for you, right? If we had an operating system that you knew when you were focusing or not focusing, it could be hold all my calls, hold all my messages while I'm focusing on something, and only interrupt me when I change focus. That'd be a much better way, but you're trusting it with a lot of information, so that there's only certain companies that I would even remotely trust with this kind of information that have a tracker.
And those are overly simplistic models. I'm sorry, I'm going to challenge you.
Yeah.
What my face is doing while I'm playing a game or anything else is none of anyone's in the system's business whatsoever.
Yep.
Even the game I'm playing locally, it's none of its business. So, take the same thing. Now apply it to Zoom meeting, and you realize how stupid it is that it can tell you're not looking at the camera, you're looking at another window that has your partial attention. That is a socially constructed negotiation, not a technical one. It pisses me off about the long history of all of this, and I'm guilty of it at the beginning. I'm the co-creator of a lot of the things that were already talked about today, is that there's a technical bias that if we think we can design a technical solution for a social problem, we do. Meta, when they had problems with groping, implemented a no-touch zone at a meter distance from your avatar. That had already been known to not work.
Yeah.
If you don't know this expression, you should. The pool is closed, right? And that doesn't mean anything to you. That means you don't understand anything about the stupid technology approaches people have made to try to solve social problems. And facial scanning particularly ticks me off, because the presumption that any software needs to know where I'm looking at this moment is part of that bias.
Yep.
Right? My focus is mind to divide. It's a social contract between me and any parties that might be involved in that, including my games.
Yeah, an opt-in
It's
scenario.
it's always.
But the opt-in needs
doesn't
to be.
matter if it produces utility in the 5% case that's really powerful for some AI to learn how to make a better product. That's the excuse we've been using.
Yeah, I think that we see that again and again, in that the few good uses get people in the door, and that enables all the bad uses. So with eye tracking, take it specifically, Meta lets you turn it on. It's opt-in. You don't have eye tracking on the Quest Pro. So that's kind of good that they made it opt-in. So you could decide if you wanted to use that device not to turn it on. But what you'd lose immediately by turning it off is, if you had an avatar that was in a world and an avatar was animated with your facial expressions, it would not track your eyes the way your eyes were moving. You would also lose, not on that device yet, but the PlayStation 2 VR2 is one of the first devices that has good foveated rendering. And so that means you get better performance out of the hardware for the cost of having it track your eyes to know where to put the energy, where to spend the budget. So you turn those two features off immediately by not doing it. So a lot of people are going to say, okay, I'll do it because I want those two features. What you don't want to do is also turn on the exploitive features. And so what I would focus on in this case is making sure that we have policies in place that protect the data in a way that it can't be abused. So the data should never leave the device. In the case of avatars, sending my avatar eyes over to your headset so that you can render me, it has to be encrypted in a way where you can't save the data either. You get the key temporarily to decrypt it and show the stream, but as soon as that's over, you don't have the data. And the data never gets sent to the cloud. Like, it needs to be done really carefully so that the uses that we know people want won't open up us to all the other uses.
And that's the stuff I'm working on now, which is capability-based security models, which is from the beginning, you only get what you're given.
Right.
Instead of hardware and software granting all the capabilities for all of the possible usages for everything in order to write software.
Right.
If I get access to the file system, I get to steal your data. If I get access to the network, I get to transmit your Bitcoin anywhere I want in the universe.
Right.
This is because we built technological layers, and then we think we can fix it at the application layer, and constantly we can't. I'm going to still be a little more subtle in this group. I think almost all the time I don't want my avatar to reflect my facials. It's only when I want it.
Right.
So it's not even default on or off. It's like, right now I want to see you that I'm smiling.
Right.
Otherwise, I want you to see my fake smile all the time.
Right.
If I'm upset, and I don't want you to see I'm upset, I shouldn't have to turn on and off facial tracking in a big, meta, universal way. Right?
Because then people will notice you turning it off. And then
Yes,
that
and
becomes
that's
stigma,
not
and then
how
you feel pressure
expression
to
works.
leave it on, yeah.
It's not a binary value.
Yeah. You may want to only turn it on with people you trust, right? So that even if you were in a room full of people, if I only trust you, you see my real eye movements, but everybody else sees the generic fake one. That should be a possibility because you don't know whether the people in the room are bots and collecting data. Like you don't know what's going on, so you want to be super careful about it. So we're pushing the companies to at least, so they got to the point of opt-in. That's better than nothing. The next hurdle is to get them to have permissions by use case. And then I agree, after that, you want to get into the specifics of only use it for this situation when I want it and don't have it on all the time. I totally agree with you. But the companies will claim too expensive, too hard to do. So we have to push them on.
We've had to push to talk for microphones forever. There's plenty of precedent for push to express my facial expressions.
I think that's doable. My meta point is that I agree with you also that it should be probably lower than the application layer. Something operating systems are there to protect part of the data that's on the machine. So you want it in the operating system, and you even want it down to the point of, like on our iPhones, there's a thing called secure enclave, so that certain data can't even be read in memory. It's only stored there. That's where your Face ID would be stored or something else like that. And so secure enclaves are there to make sure the data really never leaves the device, even if the government gets their hands on it, right? Nobody can crack it.
And the Linux hackers who are going to be at GDC are focused on this from the avatar persona perspective and sort of hitting it from the other angle. So I've been watching where they've been deciding which pieces of the information do we include and which ones do we say no, thank you to, because there is a different choice to be made all the way through.
So, is there time for one more question?
I don't know.
Yeah.
How we doing?
Yeah, I also have one last question.
Okay.
But you can, if that's okay.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, great.
So, I mean, I'm super on board with your principles, but it just feels like such a daunting task to go to these companies and say, your holy grail of invasive surveillance advertising, your golden, I want to basically tell you no because it would be super unethical, which it would be.
Yeah.
What is your leverage then? Like, where do you go in those conversations? How do you even get through the door with these companies that they just think of the marketing dollars and then that's what actually funds the R&D that you want the ethics to go into? Like, how do you approach that kind of conversation?
Multiple tracks at the same time. So as an individual, I will stand up and say, I think we need regulation to make sure that our personal private data and advertising never meet. They should be firewalled in the same way that we had a Glass-Steagall Act that kept banks away from Wall Street for a while. And when we got rid of that, it caused big problems, right? Same problems that we had why we put it in the first place, right? And I think we need that kind of a law here. But I'm only advocating for that as an individual. The Guild is not an advocacy org in that sense. We're a group that tries to persuade individuals to do the right thing. And so, if the CEO of the company is not a member of the Guild, there's nothing we can do about that. But if we can get a whole bunch of people in the Guild that work at those companies, that helps the level of understanding of better practices. They may not be able to change the business model, but they may be able to add child safety. They may be able to add good things to these products because they're armed with information and other people who agree with them that they know that they can push back when the manager says we can't afford that. They can say, actually it's cheaper, so let's do the right thing. The more people that accept the principles that are in it and talk about it, the better. So a lot of what we do is just train people to talk about this stuff. to have the facts, to know how to engage. The reason we have these monthly meetups is to practice these conversations, to have the deep dives, make them interesting and entertaining, so that anybody who thinks they're interested in it can be drawn in to the discussion and learn something, and not just sit in a lecture, but actually participate and feel empowered. Really.
Yeah, like at AWE, we had some brainstorming sessions of literally that question, like how can we make an impact? What are the different ways, right? And journalism came up, and how to and some of the things that Avi's talked about, but just part of it is we're meeting as a group to actually solve these questions that you have.
But if you want to bring a roundtable to your events, that's something we do as well, and we work with other events to figure out how to create space for that conversation. So if you have some ideas, come bring them.
Yeah.
I work for, and a really distressing thing there was dissolved its trust and safety team, just for cost saving, like purely. And every one of these principles, well, okay, from my recollection of reading them all minutes ago, I think they all apply to web communities too, any kind of community that takes place in a computer-mediated way. So, yeah, even when I go to work, it's exhausting. New features are shipped all the time now, with just absolutely no control for making someone unable to harass you in a way. So, yeah, it's interesting how, to the extent to which I want to take these to my job, where no one would brand anything that we do XR or Metaverse or anything,
But Open Metaverse Interop works primarily on GitHub, and I would love to talk to you more, so we can follow up after this about where those align.
And we just started using Gitbooks too. That we're building a library, and actually Gitbooks turned out to be a really great way to do it. So it syncs with GitHub, so it's the same data. It's just it's a nicer front end on the Markdown stuff that lets you edit it in a little more WYSIWYG. But it syncs right to our GitHub repo, so you can edit it either way. It's super cool. That we're not ready to do this, but ultimately what we hope to do is to work with others and get to something that's like the Hippocratic Oath for our field, so that ideally kids coming out of school will just take the oath and say, I understand these principles. It could be a different set of principles, but they'll be just as good or better. But for people already in the field, we can say, hey, look, I'm going to try to voluntarily do this now. And hopefully when we get to critical mass of people, then it will just become natural. It'll become the thing that people just do, to have the conversations to figure out what is the right thing to do. We'd have thousands of principles if we tried to be prescriptive about every situation. So it's like a constitution, and you try to provide enough of the ribs to make sense, and then you have a Supreme Court and Congress that try to interpret and add to it. You here try to provide the basis of all the thinking, and then make sure people are empowered to have the discussions to say, is this feature really the right thing we should do? And that's why you don't want really wimpy principles. You don't want the principle like, do the right thing, help people. Like, no, we got to be a little more specific than that, right? It's too easy to think we are. Some of these companies think they are doing the right thing when they're doing things that everybody else says are wrong. So the principles narrowly drawn should help us differentiate the BS from the reality.
Cool. All right. So my question kind of relates to the space that we're in right now. So I've worked in technology for a while now, and I'm super passionate about community-based organizations. But community-based organizations, I think, tend to be at the whim of the markets, like particularly technology right now, right? So I think that when I think of like the .com boom and bust, like that was like a huge amount of funding, and then like boom, like no funding. But a lot of those community-based organizations didn't actually get the kind of knowledge that they needed in order to navigate the next 10 to 20 years. And then like finally it feels like they're catching up. And what you're suggesting is that like there's potentially another wave. So like what could community-based organizations do in order to like be ready for these principles and like this next wave, when like a lot of them are just trying to like make it to the next year, right?
Long-term resiliency and also function and sharing at the same time. One of the first communities I created in Second Life back in 2006 is the nonprofit Commons. It's also as far as I know, one of the longest lasting metaverse virtual world communities that still exists and is still working. That community, it's a subsect of TechSoup, but having those kinds of nonprofit and other community resources that you can constantly go back to, these principles are exactly what we've been living out now for almost 20 years. And so there are already groups that have figured out, okay, we can take this back and we've got grant language for you. So when you need to write a grant, we got this one through with this foundation 7 years ago, and you might be able to learn from the others who've already done it. So Nonprofit Commons is one of many like sort of associated groups, and it's free to join, but it's one of those things that's been in the metaverse now for almost 18 years. So in virtual worlds, right, within these spaces. So I would encourage you to keep reaching out. TechSoup finally passed on Nonprofit Commons, but there are a number of these related groups that are nonprofits that are open, right? XR Guild is an open organization. You can join. You are all professionals in the field. You're welcome to come in there and find the others. So we have a Discord channel, and you can say, okay, are there other people leading nonprofits here? Have you ever written a grant for this? Are you with a university? Because we need a principal investigator to work with, right? Those are the sorts of things we would do on our Discord.
So then a kind of a quick question, because we do also interact with nonprofits that are less technical.
Yeah.
But they will be impacted in a very dramatic way. Like they were impacted by the internet. And so like, what would you kind of suggest to those? Like some that are a little bit more localized. So maybe like localized to Oakland, right?
Are you teaching and giving workshops and building that as an educational layer here?
Yeah, so what we do is we actually collaborate with some nonprofits, and we bring our video games out. But kids will play the video games, but it's really hard to kind of bring them into our space and go like, hey, like you should play these video games and learn about the history of where we come from in order to know like what decisions you should be aware of that have already been made. Kind of like what Randy was talking about. There have been things that have been tried and they didn't work. But it's hard because they may not have the technical foundation to even start, right? And it's a lot of times it's the adults. Like the adults will be telling kids, don't play the games. Like you're just gonna waste your time. When a lot of times that's actually the thing that is going to get them into. Yeah, do you get what I'm hearing? It's like it feels like a lot of nonprofits are like 10 or 20 years behind, and then it hits them, and then like they're dragged into it without being ready.
Here's a lesson I think I'll try to add. By the way, you mentioned the playing games. I always find it humorous when I go to my 12-year-old son and say, please play games. Stop watching videos about other people playing games. I want you to play the games. It's very much a nice turn on that. But one of the things that I've learned, and I think people are starting to learn, is that communities actually may be the only proper way to organize a lot of this stuff. And one of our members is also in AA and pointed out that AA was founded on not the 12 steps, but there's 12 rules in AA that are very similar to our principles. But one of them that's different, and I think it's worth thinking about, is there's no centralization. Every group of AA is autonomous from all the other groups. They can make their own decisions. And what works is when you have a small group of people, less than 150 or so, they know each other's names, there's peer pressure to behave well, there's support systems to behave well, and if anybody is acting poorly, it gets flagged pretty fast. Whereas as soon as you start to grow and try to become national and top down, that's when a lot of the bad things crop in, right? So it's not that community is the only possible way to solve it, but the lessons learned from building communities, I think, can help us scale these things better. We could scale the guild better by not trying to have everything run from a central organization, but try to empower local chapters, for example. Anybody who wants to start a chapter can start a chapter, and we'll try to help, but not tell you what to do or not to do. I think those principles those are true of many nonprofits and charities. And I think the ones that go astray are the ones that wind up spending all their time fundraising and paying a lot of money to their executives and don't wind up helping people as much as they should, versus the grassroots ones, which are very distributed by their nature. So that's an important lesson that we're learning from community organizers, not teaching.
But then, the thing I'm kind of getting at is that do you believe that nonprofits that are not technical can get left behind?
Absolutely, unless there are people there willing to meet those education gaps, and that's across all different technologies, and whether it's apps or games or live streaming or you name it. And so, is there an opportunity there for the maid to lead? Absolutely. If you look at, 20 years of XR, for example, the Metaverse roadmap, like 2005, was because Mitch Kapoor helped make that happen, right? And so the people who were there in 2005 are still here in our community today, and figuring out how to tap back into the last 25, 30 years of talent that is already here in the Bay Area. I mean, these are the kinds of things that I think you've got some rich fodder to build a new world on top of, right? How you make that playful and engaging and something that other people want to come and bring their friends for. I mean, I think you're gamers, so by nature, you're going to figure that part of it out too.
With the one caveat of it is still an evolving technology, and so there is a sense of when is the right time, right, for a non-technical group to embrace something technical, if I'm understanding your question well enough, right? Like, was brick phones the right time for a nonprofit to have a smartphone, or a mobile phone? Probably not, right? So, like, at what point in the technology's evolution is it the right time to engage? I would say for ours, if I had to give a recommendation, AR maybe just fine right now. VR, I would hold on for another 1 or 2 generations.
Yeah, I think like longer term, we're looking at this isn't
in general, right? Like, it depends on.
And I'm not totally answering your question here, but the roadmap for a lot of this tech is for the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to really be dominated by these big companies that don't always have everyone's best interests at heart. Just like with PCs, we're repeating a lot of those early days. Eventually, when there's enough devices and they get normalized, that's where all the open source and the Linux of the future, maybe still Linux, come in. And I think we're going to be able to bridge across these devices and have a much more equitable world that isn't controlled by one company. But we still have to go through the CompuServe and AOL days again for AR. I think we're going to face that, where the walled gardens are going to be the only place where there's safe and good stuff for the most part, for most people, and not for the early adopters, but for people at large who aren't as technical. But that's going to give way to something that's going to be much more grassroots later, I think.
And also cost and also usability, which I think are 2 really big things that are important for non-technical nonprofits.
Yeah, maybe one more point too is that a lot of the goal for this tech for XR is to make the tech disappear, to become as normal and everyday as possible, not to make it be another world. And I'm not advocating for meeting rooms that look like today's meeting rooms, but it's more that the technology should blend into the backdrop. And so it should be much more accessible to people who are less technical and not as early adopters.
Yes.
That should be one thing different about this technology. If we do it right,
it's
going to feel a lot more natural, that you can use your body when you want to, when you give permission, but use that to interact and not have to learn so much to be able to get in the door.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing is that you're suggesting that it's an inevitability that any of this technology, we're going to have to go through that cycle.
It's so expensive to build at scale right now. I mean, the companies I advise, companies we invest in, start small. They can deal with a few $1 million, but some of the big projects I've worked on are billions of dollars. Who's going to collect the billions of dollars needed to make these things, except for the big companies?
But a museum locally could build a WebXR experience that's meaningful for the community,
Sure.
right? There are lots of ways that you can do something meaningful in the space without building hardware or something super pricey.
Right. And without being behind, right? If the question is, when are you going to upgrade your payment systems to Square, right? Or, you know what I mean? Like, right now, I don't think you would be behind if you didn't do it, but to your point, there are opportunities to engage.
Mm-hmm. Public art, AR, especially with public art, that's a wide open space right now that you have the tools and the availability and probably some community buy-in to do something.
Yeah. Good question. Such a pleasure being here.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you all.
Thank you so much.
And Randy, great to see you.